It was, as Lord Peter Wimsey later remarked, a murder committed with a librarian's sense of decorum, which, coming from him, meant the whole affair smelt faintly of mothballs and quiet venom. The rain had been falling for 3 days over Barrow in Fern, turning the lanes into silvered rills and the churchyard stones into blotting paper. Inside the tall brick pile of Leckenham Court, part country house, part lending library, and wholly self-satisfied, the members of the Literary and Antiquarian Society were taking tea with a kind of brittle politeness that usually precedes either scandal or a fundraising appeal. Lord Peter had arrived under a pretext as unconvincing as it was charming, an invitation to address the society on the subject of lost ballads of the Jacobean stage. Harriet had gone off to Oxford for a week of lectures, and Bunter had been dispatched ahead to make discreet inquiries about the quality of the local cellars. Thus Wimsey was free to drift about the house, collecting impressions as other people collect autographs. In his case, preferably forged. In the long gallery, between a faded tapestry of St. Jerome and a grotesque marble bust of some forgotten Whig, stood the book in question. Its spine was cracked, but its gilt still proud. A monstrous quarto, bound in dark calf and smelling faintly of camphor. Above it hung a polite little notice in Mrs. Warden's angular hand. "Please do not handle without gloves." "It's rather a fraud, you know," said Mr. Fenwick, the Society's secretary, bustling up with the air of one both eager and resentful. Supposed to be a unique copy of the 17th century devotional tracts of Simeon Culverhouse. But I've never believed it. The old colonel, Mrs. Warden's late uncle, bought it from a dealer of no reputation. Wimsey tilted his monocle at the thing, which refracted both the dull window light and Fenwick's anxious reflection. "A tract," he murmured, "may preach more than its author intended. This one appears to have acquired a reputation for something other than edification." Fenwick gave a nervous laugh. "We only keep it on display because Mrs. Warden insists. She's sentimental about her uncle. But between you and me, it's been nothing but trouble. Catalogues mislaid, pages stuck together, people swearing they've seen it before." At which point a scream, genteel, yet piercing, shot down the gallery like a startled bird. Wimsey removed his monocle and replaced it with deliberate care. "Ah," he said, "our program diverges from the usual tea and talk." They found Mrs. Warden at the far end of the room near the oak reading desk, hands clasped to her cheeks, eyes fixed on a shape slumped forward over a pile of pamphlets. The shape was a man, middle-aged, balding at the crown, still clutching in one hand a pair of kid gloves he had not managed to put on. The other hand hung at an unnatural angle, fingers splayed as though reaching for the book that waited on the shelf too long. Inspector Latch of the County Constabulary arrived 20 minutes later in mud-spattered boots and an air of cheerful certainty. "Heart failure, if you ask me," he announced, kneeling by the body. "Old fellow like that, excitement over some dusty volume, drops dead. Seen it before. We'll have him removed presently." Lord Peter's eyes, however, had drifted from the corpse to the window, then to the clock on the mantel. 5 minutes slow," he observed. Latch glanced up. "Beg pardon." "The clock," said Wimsey. 5 minutes slow. I only mention it because you appear fond of punctual conclusions." He bent, not over the dead man, but over the desk, and examined a faint smear of something dark on the edge of the oak. Curious. Ink, one would assume, but not quite the right viscosity. Mrs. Warden, pale but composed, stood by the tapestry. "It's Mr. Halliwell," she whispered. "Our archivist. He was only going to fetch the gloves." "Ah, yes," said Wimsey. "The gloves. Always a delicate question, who wears them, and who leaves fingerprints?" Bunter arrived silently with an umbrella and a look of quiet readiness. Wimsey handed him his hat as if they were at a matinee. "Bunter, perhaps you'd be so good as to make a note of the condition of the room. Inspector Latch prefers his evidence tidy." The inspector flushed but said nothing. His sergeant had begun fussing with the corpse, producing the conventional murmurs about stiffening and body temperature. Wimsey, meanwhile, was peering at the bookshelves with what looked like idle interest, but was in fact calculation. He noted the positions of several volumes, the faint outline of dust where one had recently been removed, and the absence of a slip catalogue from its usual drawer. "Do you suppose," he asked Mrs. Warden suddenly, "that Mr. Halliwell believed in ghosts?" She blinked. "Ghosts? Good heavens, no." "Then," said Wimsey, "it is particularly unfortunate that he appears to have been frightened to death by one." This remark produced a gratifying silence, broken only by the patter of rain against the leaded panes. Wimsey pocketed his monocle and straightened. "Inspector Latch, you will forgive me if I make a nuisance of myself. But when a man dies while reaching for a book, and that book has a history of being something it is not, one begins to suspect that the cause of death may be less devotional than deliberate." Latch bristled. "If you've information, my lord, best you share it." "Information," said Wimsey lightly, "is like wine. Offered too soon, it turns sour." He bowed slightly to Mrs. Warden. "May I see the household staff at your convenience?" One learns much from people who know nothing at all, and with that he strolled out into the corridor, humming a fragment of Purcell, leaving Inspector Latch to wonder whether the case of the book that waited on the shelf too long would prove as simple as heart failure or as complicated as Lord Peter Wimsey's smile. The servants of Leconham Court, being mostly relics of the Colonel's day, bore the news of Mr. Halliwell's demise with the subdued curiosity of people who have dusted around tragedy before. They gathered in the small breakfast room under the benevolent portrait of Queen Mary, like chess pieces unwilling to move without prompting. Wimsey entered with the air of a man who has lost his way en route to a concert but finds himself instead at an intriguing rehearsal. Bunter, impeccable as a second violin, hovered at the door with notebook poised. Inspector Latch had grudgingly agreed to let Lord Peter ask a few polite questions before the official statements began. "Mrs. Warden tells me," Wimsey began, "that you each saw Mr. Halliwell at some time this afternoon. Perhaps you could enlighten me as to your various comings and goings. I have a deplorable weakness for timetables. First came Mrs. Bligh, the housekeeper, solid as a sideboard and twice as polished." She clasped her hands and spoke with reluctant precision. "Mr. Halliwell had the key to the long gallery. He signed it out from the desk at 3 o'clock, sir. Said he was going to make notes about the Culver House book for the catalogue. And when did you last see him alive?" "About 3:30. He passed me on the landing, seemed in a hurry." "No gloves on then?" Sir Wimsey made a note. "No gloves at 3:30. Curious, since he died clutching them. Did he carry anything else?" "Only his fountain pen and a sheaf of slips. He's particular about his cataloguing." Next was Davis, the undergardener, moonlighting as odd man indoors. He shifted from foot to foot, smelling faintly of damp loam. "I was in the hall laying out the umbrellas, my lord. Saw Mr. Halliwell go by. Thought he looked pale. He asked whether the clock in the passage had been wound. Said it was 5 minutes slow." Wimsey's eyebrows twitched with the pleasure of a puzzle piece sliding into place. "Did he indeed? And did you tell him it had?" "No, sir. I said it always loses time when the weather's wet." Then Martha, the parlour maid, a thin girl with a nervous tick at the corner of her mouth. "I was bringing in the tea things," she whispered. "Mr. Halliwell near knocked me over coming out of the study. Said something about gloves." Then he went back towards the gallery. "And what time was that?" 4:15, sir, because the stable clock struck just as I was setting the tray down." Inspector Latch cleared his throat. "All this about clocks, my lord. Do you mean to suggest he died at a different time than we think?" "Merely that time," said Wimsey, "is like a governess. Strict until you understand her weaknesses." He turned back to the staff. You see anyone else in the gallery this afternoon?" A shuffle of negatives. Mrs. Bligh volunteered. "Only Miss Ingledew, the Colonel's niece. She was dusting the display cases at 2 before tea. Miss Ingledew, repeated Whimsy. A name out of a pastoral poem. Does she also handle gloves? She's particular about the gloves, sir. Won't let anyone touch that big book without them. Whimsy dismissed the staff with a word of thanks and a small lecture on the proper treatment of rare volumes. When the door closed, he turned to Bunter. We have an archivist obsessed with gloves, a niece obsessed with gloves, and a book that nobody is supposed to touch without gloves. Yet Halliwell dies reaching for it barehanded, with the gloves still in his grasp. Bunter murmured, "It would be consistent with a sudden fright, my lord. One forgets to put them on, or one never intended to put them on." Whimsy paced to the window. "Consider, Bunter, at 3 o'clock he signs out the key. By 3:30 he's hurrying upstairs gloveless. By 3:45 he's colliding with Martha, muttering about gloves. Shortly after, he's dead. Our problem is not who killed him, but what he was trying to handle when he died." Latch, less poetically inclined, said, "Poison on the pages, is that it? Some old book dust? Possibly. Or possibly nothing so theatrical." Whimsy lifted the pair of kid gloves from a chair where the sergeant had placed them. They were new, cream-colored, faintly perfumed with lavender. "Bought recently," he murmured. "A man as fastidious as Halliwell would not forget to wear them unless he had reason. We must see Miss Ingledew." Miss Ingledew was waiting in the music-room, which smelled of dried roses and faint disapproval. She was a tall, pale young woman with an angular face and the air of someone perpetually on the verge of confession. "Miss Ingledew," said Whimsy with a bow, "I gather you are custodian of your uncle's treasures." "I try to be," she said quietly, "though Mr. Halliwell did most of the real work." "You were dusting the gallery at 2?" "Yes. The cases collect lint terribly in this damp weather. I always wear gloves." Mr. Halliwell insisted, "Yet today he did not." She looked startled. He always did. He even kept a spare pair in his desk. He was quite fussy about it. Whimsy studied her with the mild, incurious gaze that most people find more unsettling than a direct stare. "Tell me, Miss Ingledew, did your uncle ever mention the book's provenance to you?" "Only that it was rare and valuable. He left it to me in his will. But the society keeps it on display, a kind gesture. Rare books are like cats. They develop loyalty to place rather than owner." She gave a faint smile that quickly died. "Do you think Mr. Halliwell's death had anything to do with the book?" "My dear young lady," said Whimsy, "in a house where one object is labeled, 'Do not touch without gloves,' one always suspects that someone has touched it, or intends to." She clasped her hands. He had been anxious all morning. He said the catalogue was wrong, that something was missing, something missing. A slip. He didn't say which, only that it might ruin the society's reputation if it came to light. Whimsy's eyes brightened. "Delicious. Missing slips, gloves, slow clocks." "Bunter, we are in for a treat," Miss Ingledew, bewildered, said, "Do you think Mr. Halliwell was murdered?" "I think," said Whimsy, "that when a man devoted to accuracy complains of a missing slip and then dies reaching for the book concerned, one should at least entertain the hypothesis of human agency. Inspector Latch prefers the simpler view, but he has not read enough Jacobean tragedy." As they left the music-room, Latch muttered, "You make everything sound like a play, my lord." "It generally is," said Whimsy. "The trick lies in discovering who wrote the script." He paused at the foot of the stairs and glanced back toward the long gallery where the great book lay under its sign. The rain had stopped, and a pale shaft of evening light slanted through the windows, touching the calfskin binding with a faint, unholy gleam. Whimsy smiled faintly. "A book," he said, "that waits on the shelf too long develops ideas above its station. We had better examine it before it decides to turn another page of its own accord." Inspector Latch, determined to assert his jurisdiction, announced that he had a likely suspect before the body had even been removed from the long gallery. This suspect turned out to be Mr. Joseph Carroway, a man whose connection to the case was tenuous but colorful, and therefore ideal for a police theory. Carroway was a dealer in antiquarian books from Cheltenham, a heavy man with a florid face whose habit of referring to every acquisition as "my find" gave him an air of perpetual discovery. He had arrived at Leconham Court that afternoon under the pretext of discussing a future exhibition with Mrs. Warden. The housemaid Martha had glimpsed him slipping out through the side door not long after Mr. Hallowell's collapse. "Suspicious behavior, my lord," said Latch with satisfaction. "He's an outsider, and he fled." Whimsy, who was examining the rain-slicked gravel of the side path with a small magnifying glass Bunter had produced from somewhere about his person, murmured, "Outsiders often have the good taste to flee when something unpleasant happens indoors. Saves the staff making tea." Nevertheless, Latch sent a constable to fetch Carroway back from the village inn, and the bookseller was ushered into the oak-panelled drawing-room looking both indignant and damp. "I demand to know what this is about," he said, mopping his brow. "I came to see Mrs. Warden, not to be interrogated like a common thief." "Not common, Mr. Carroway," said Whimsy pleasantly. "Antiquarian." Carroway scowled. "If this is about that blasted Culver House tract, I'll tell you now. It's a fake. I told the colonel, so when he bought it, that must have endeared you to him," said Whimsy, "and to his heir." "I was doing him a favor," Carroway retorted. "Saved him wasting money on binding repairs, but he was stubborn, insisted it was genuine, said he'd found marginal notes proving it. I never saw them. Whimsy let this settle like dust on a neglected shelf." "And today?" "I came because Mrs. Warden invited me to advise on valuation." Hallowell met me at the door. He was in a state, said someone had tampered with the catalogue, told me to wait in the morning room, then he disappeared. When I heard the commotion later, I left. Frankly, I've no wish to be involved in their squabbles. Latch pounced. "You were seen leaving by the side door at 4 o'clock. Why?" "I had an appointment with a client in the village." "Check the time if you like." "Indeed we shall," said Whimsy, who was inspecting the man's shoes. They were thick-soled, the sort a man wears to tramp about second-hand bookshops. A smear of something dark clung to one heel. "Bunter," murmured Whimsy. "Note the mud. Does it match the smear on the desk edge?" Bunter bent with his discreet air of domesticity. "Possibly, my lord. The consistency is similar, more like printer's ink mixed with damp earth than ordinary mud." Carroway flushed. "If you're implying I've been in the long gallery unsupervised?" No, said Whimsy lightly. "Merely that book dealers have a habit of leaving traces. One wonders which is more incriminating, fingerprints or a whiff of foxed paper. Mrs. Warden entered at that moment, pale but composed, carrying a small tray of keys. "These are the duplicates," she said. "The staff have been searching." Mr. Hallowell had the only original this afternoon. Whimsy took the tray and let the keys jingle like minor characters in a farce. "Excellent. The fewer keys, the simpler the problem. In fact, Inspector, our universe may be contracting." Latch frowned. "Are you saying Carroway's innocent?" "I'm saying," said Whimsy, "that when everyone is very sure a book is genuine or fake, the truth is usually something subtler. Mr. Carroway may be wrong in his expertise, but right in his timing, or vice versa. Let us not waste our red herring. It may flavor the soup." He turned to Carroway. "One final question. Did Mr. Hallowell show you any of the marginal notes he claimed proved authenticity?" Carroway hesitated. "He showed me a slip, a catalogue slip. Said it was the key. But he wouldn't let me read it. Just waved it under my nose and locked it away again." "And when was this?" 3:30. He seemed, well, excited. Said he might have been wrong all along. Whimsy's face grew still. 3:30. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Carroway. You may go back to your inn, but please no more side doors." When Carraway had gone, Latch said, "Well, my lord," if he had the motive, to discredit Halliwell, to get the book cheap, and the chance. "And yet," said Wimsey, "he showed no curiosity about the gloves. Our dead archivist, however, obsessed over them to the end. You see, Inspector, Carraway is our red herring, valuable, full-bodied, but dead all the same." He strolled to the window and watched the rain start again, thin and silvery. "Bunter, do you know what interests me?" "The clock, my lord." "Always." "But more than that." A slip of paper Halliwell brandished like a conjurer's card and then hid. "Find the slip, and we shall find the motive." "Perhaps also the murderer," Bunter said softly. "And Miss Ingledew?" "She is our next movement," said Wimsey. "A niece, an inheritance, a rare book, gloves, a missing slip, and a man dead before he could put them on. Our stage is set. We only need to discover who's writing the dialogue." As they left the drawing-room, Wimsey paused before the long gallery. The book still lay under its glass, innocent as an altar-piece. He tapped the case gently. "A red herring, Inspector, is a smoked fish, but a book," he said, "that waits too long on the shelf may begin to smoke of its own accord. We must open it before someone else does." By the following morning, the rain had softened into a pale drizzle, and the lawns of Leckenham Court steamed like cooling pudding. Inspector Latch had posted a constable at every obvious door and declared the house secured, a pronouncement which made Lord Peter smile faintly. Houses, in his experience, had more ways of breathing than a church organ. He appeared at breakfast in a tweed suit of uncompromising checks, looking like a man preparing to lecture on Milton rather than investigate a death. Mrs. Warden, pale but managing a hostess's duties, poured coffee with a hand that trembled only slightly. Miss Ingledew sat at the far end, her spoon idle in her saucer. The remaining guests and staff glanced at Wimsey with a mixture of curiosity and dread, as though he might suddenly accuse the teapot. "You have slept well, Miss Ingledew?" he inquired in a tone of drawing-room politeness. "Not really," she admitted. "I keep thinking about Mr. Halliwell." He was so precise. "To die in such a messy way seems—" She trailed off. "Out of character," supplied Wimsey. "Yes, like a neat book with a dog-eared page." He buttered his toast with maddening calm. "Have you by chance seen the catalogue since yesterday?" Her eyes flicked up. "No, Inspector Latch has it." Latch grunted. "Locked in the study. We'll go through it after breakfast." Wimsey dabbed his lips. "Splendid. Meanwhile, may I ask you all a few irrelevant questions?" A stir ran round the table. Mrs. Warden murmured, "If you think it will help." "It rarely helps," said Wimsey cheerfully, "but it amuses me." And amusement, like breakfast, is fortifying. He turned to the footman, a lank youth named George. "George, when you lay the fire in the long gallery, which grate do you use?" The youth blinked. "The east one, my lord." "The west grate smokes, and who winds the clock in the passage?" "I do, sir." "Every Monday morning. Was it wound this week?" "Yes, sir, but it always loses when it's damp." Wimsey thanked him gravely and turned to Mrs. Bligh. "And the gloves? Where are they usually kept?" "In a drawer under Mr. Halliwell's desk, my lord." "Clean pairs in tissue paper. He said the oils from our skin could ruin the leather, fastidious to the end," murmured Wimsey. "Tell me, Mrs. Bligh, was there any reason he might fetch a new pair yesterday?" She frowned. "Not unless someone had used the old ones." "We're very strict." Wimsey rose suddenly. "Bunter, we shall take the morning air. Inspector Latch, when you have quite finished your breakfast, you may join us in the gallery." "I should like to see the gloves drawer out in the corridor," Bunter said quietly. "Your amusement, my lord." "The kind one derives from a bad play with a good cast," said Wimsey. "Consider, the clock slow, the gloves new, the missing slip, the ink smear. Each a triviality. Yet trivialities are the breadcrumbs of murder. We shall follow them and see whose cottage they lead to. They entered the long gallery. The curtains hung limp, heavy with damp. The big book lay under its case, gilt title glinting. Whimsy circled it like a connoisseur examining a suspect Rembrandt. "Bunter," he said, "remove the glass, if you please." Bunter did so with a neat flick of his white gloves. Whimsy bent over the book, nose almost touching the calf. He did not open it. Instead, he inspected the edge of the shelf, then the floorboards immediately below. "Ah," he said softly. "Dust disturbed, but not uniformly." "Someone has been on their knees here, Mr. Halliwell," Bunter suggested. "Possibly. Or someone searching for the missing slip latch arrived, boots squeaking, expression sour." "Well, my lord?" "No poison darts yet." "No," said Whimsy, "but we have a dartboard." He straightened and indicated the shelf below the great book. "Empty space. There should be a box here." Latch peered. "Box? A slip box," said Whimsy. "Cataloguers keep them. Small drawers for index cards. Your Mr. Halliwell complained of a missing slip. I suspect the whole box is gone." "Bunter?" Bunter crouched and examined the dust outline. "Yes, my lord." Removed within the last day, Latch swore softly. "Then Carraway took it." "Carraway," said Whimsy, "left in a hurry but with nothing under his coat, and one does not easily conceal a box of that size without appearing gravid." "No, Inspector, someone nearer home." He crossed to Halliwell's desk and pulled open the glove drawer. Inside lay neat rows of cream kid, but one pair was darker, older, faintly stained at the fingertips. "Curious," said Whimsy. "These are not Halliwell's usual make." "And they smell. What is that, Bunter?" "Printer's ink and lavender, my lord." "Precisely the scent on Mr. Carraway's shoes. Yet these gloves were here before Carraway arrived. Therefore, someone else using ink," Bunter murmured. Whimsy smiled. "Our play improves. We have a missing slip box, alien gloves, and a book everyone fears to touch. I dare say our red herring is cooked and ready to serve." He replaced the gloves, dusted his hands, and looked out at the sodden lawns. "Inspector, we shall convene the household in the drawing-room this afternoon. I want them to describe, in their own words, where they were between 3 and 4 yesterday. I particularly wish to hear Miss Ingledew's account again." Latch growled. "If you already know who did it, why not say so?" "My dear man," said Whimsy, "half the pleasure of chess lies in moving the pieces before announcing checkmate. Besides, I should like to be sure. Nothing so embarrassing as accusing the wrong bishop." He took up his hat. "Come, Bunter. We have a village to visit. Somewhere there is a receipt for a new pair of gloves, and perhaps a witness who noticed who posted a heavy parcel yesterday. Murder leaves a paper trail as surely as scholarship does." As they left the gallery, Whimsy's eyes went once more to the great book. "Theatrical," he murmured. "Very nearly supernatural, but not quite. We shall unmask the actor soon enough." The village of Barrow-in-Fern had one shop that doubled as post office, newsagent and informal clearing-house of gossip. Lord Peter entered it that damp afternoon with his hat tipped at a jaunty angle, as though calling for seed catalogues rather than clues. Bunter followed, immaculate even in drizzle. Mrs. Moffat, behind the counter, greeted them with the wariness of a woman who has seen more than one scandal blossom from genteel houses. "Afternoon, my lord." Stamps. 2 of the penny red and, if you please, a morsel of information. Whimsy leaned on the glass case of boiled sweets. "Did anyone from Leckenham Court come in yesterday with a parcel?" Mrs. Moffat pursed her lips. "Miss Ingledew posted a packet to London about 4:30. Heavy little thing, tied up neat." "Ah," said Whimsy lightly. "Neatness is always suspicious. Did she happen to say what it contained?" "No, but she paid for registered." gave her name proper, Whimsy bought a paper bag of humbugs, left a coin, and departed humming a scrap of Purcell. Outside, Bunter raised an eyebrow. "A slip-box to London, my lord?" "Or its contents," said Whimsy. "Either way, a flight of paper. Let us be exact about time." Back at Leckenham Court, Whimsy assembled his mental jigsaw. Hallowell had signed out the gallery key at 3, seen gloveless at past, collided with the parlour-maid at 4:45, dead before 4. Meanwhile, Miss Ingledew, by her own account, was in her room until tea and went to the village only after hearing the news. Yet Mrs. Moffat had seen her at the post office at 4:30 with a registered packet. Impossible, only if one accepts her timetable. He sent Bunter to fetch the inspector and Miss Ingledew to the drawing-room. When they arrived, Whimsy was pacing before the fire, hands clasped behind his back like a slightly theatrical don. "Miss Ingledew," he said gently, "forgive my curiosity. You posted a packet yesterday afternoon." She coloured. I did. Some letters for the society." "At 4:30? "Yes." "And you heard of Mr. Hallowell's death? When?" "Only when I came back, nearly 5. Whimsy regarded her as if she were a specimen under a lens. Most distressing, to pass so near and not be told. Latch grunted. "Are you accusing her of running off with that slip-box?" "I am," said Whimsy. "Accusing no one. I am merely rearranging the clock." He took out his watch. "Time is our enemy and our witness. Suppose Hallowell died not at 4, but at 3:40. Suppose Miss Ingledew posted her packet at 4:30, as she says. She would still have had nearly an hour to remove something from the gallery before the alarm was raised." Miss Ingledew's hands trembled. "Why would I steal from my own collection?" "That," said Whimsy, "is the interesting question. People sometimes steal not for gain, but for concealment. Did Hallowell discover something about the book that endangered your uncle's reputation? Did you send it away to suppress it, or—" His voice remained courteous. "Are you being framed by someone who knows your habits?" She opened her mouth, closed it again. I don't know what you mean." Whimsy smiled. "Then let us be prosaic. Bunter, fetch the gallery key." Bunter produced it from his inner pocket. "Found in Mr. Hallowell's waistcoat after the body was moved, my lord." "Thank you." Whimsy handed it to Latch. "Inspector, please accompany Miss Ingledew to the post office. Ask Mrs. Moffat to describe the packet again. Meanwhile, I shall amuse myself with distances." When they had gone, Whimsy walked the route from the gallery to the side door, timing each stretch with his watch. Bunter followed, noting quietly. Stairs, corridor, cloakroom, courtyard. The whole trip took 3 minutes at a brisk pace. "Thus," said Whimsy, "one could remove a slip-box, hide it in a cloak, go out the side door, reach the lane in 4 minutes and be at the post office in 15, even with a heavy parcel." "Plenty of time before 4:30, my lord," Bunter said. "Plenty," murmured Whimsy, "unless—" He broke off and went back to the gallery. The great book still lay under its glass, a docile monster. He opened it at last, turning the pages delicately. Between folios lay a faint sprinkling of dark dust. "Printer's ink," said Bunter softly, "or a message." Whimsy peered closer. In the margin of one tract, a line of cramped 17th-century handwriting had been underlined in modern pencil. The pencil lead had broken off, leaving a tiny wedge like a signature. "The wages of sin is secrecy," he read aloud. Ah, Halliwell had a sense of drama. He closed the book. "Bunter, our timetable is nearly complete. All we lack is the motive. Let us see what the postmistress says about our heavy little packet. When people tamper with clocks, gloves, and catalogues, they are usually trying to hide an interval. And an interval," he added, "is simply a hole in time where the truth may be buried." The next morning brought a thin, slate-colored sky over Barrow-in-Fern and a glistening dampness that made the gravel paths hiss underfoot. Lord Peter Wimsey had already been up since 7:30, walking the perimeter of Leckenham Court as though it were a chessboard on which someone had left pawns out of place. Bunter followed at a respectful distance with a notebook and a stopwatch. "Bunter," said Wimsey lightly, "one learns more from a house by walking it than by questioning its occupants. Houses lie less than people do." He timed the steps from the long gallery to the side door, then from the side door to the lane leading down to the post office. 3 minutes and 45 seconds at a reasonable pace, he murmured. "Call it 4. Add 10 minutes to reach the village." "Good. Our interval exists inside the house." Inspector Latch was conducting interviews with the air of a man arranging tin soldiers. He brightened when Wimsey appeared. "We've the statements, my lord." "Miss Ingledew says she was in her room until tea and then went to the village. The servants all swear they were in their places. Carraway insists he never went near the gallery." "Splendid," said Wimsey. "Everyone is exactly where they should be. It's almost too neat." He led Latch and Miss Ingledew back into the long gallery. The curtains were still drawn against the damp. The great book lay under its glass like a relic on an altar. Wimsey took out his watch. "Let us test our times. Mr. Halliwell signs out the key at 3, seen by the housekeeper at 3:30, gloveless, collides with the parlour-maid at 4:15, dead before 4. Meanwhile, Miss Ingledew posts a registered packet at the village at 4:30. According to Mrs. Moffat, Miss Ingledew's hands tightened on her handbag. "I posted some papers for the society," she said. "That's all." "Of course," said Wimsey easily. "Yet between 4:15 and 4:30 there is nearly an hour unaccounted for. Enough time for a person to remove a slip-box from this gallery, wrap it, and walk to the post office." "I would never steal from my uncle's collection," she said quietly. "Quite possibly not. But someone has. Mr. Halliwell complained of a missing slip. Now the whole box is gone. You posted a parcel. Coincidence is the coward's explanation." Latch cleared his throat. "If she took it to hide something, or if someone knew, she would be blamed," said Wimsey. "Framing inspector is a pastime older than chess." He went to Halliwell's desk and opened the glove drawer again. The new cream kid gloves, scented with lavender. Halliwell dies, clutching them unworn. Why? He picked up one pair and turned it inside out. Aha! A smear of printer's ink at the thumb. "Bunter, note it." Bunter did so, without comment. Wimsey walked to the window. "Mrs. Moffat says a heavy packet, tied neatly. Registered. Miss Ingledew, you will not mind if Inspector Latch accompanies you to the post office to confirm? It will clear your name if nothing else." She looked at Wimsey a long moment, then gave a small nod. "Very well." After they had gone, Wimsey began pacing the gallery, speaking half to himself, half to Bunter. A book possibly forged. Marginal notes perhaps fabricated. An archivist who discovers something, reaches for the book without gloves, and dies. Gloves smeared with ink. A niece who posts a mysterious packet. A slow clock, Bunter said softly. "You believe Mr. Halliwell was poisoned, my lord?" "Poisoned? Perhaps. But not with some melodramatic dust, more likely with anticipation. He was frightened. Fright does curious things to a careful man. But I fancy the gloves tell the truth. Someone handled that book or its slips recently and wanted Halliwell to take the blame. When we find the slip-box, we shall find the hand that moved the pieces." He glanced at his watch again and smiled faintly. "Time, Bunter, is elastic. One stretches it, compresses it, twists it until a murder appears to fit a different hour. That is our puzzle. We shall soon see whose timetable survives the test." By the time Miss Ingledew returned from the post office under Inspector Latch's watchful eye, the damp had lifted and a pale sun pressed through the high windows of Leckenham Court, drawing faint prisms on the parquet floor. Wimsey was already in the music room, idly picking out a fugue on the yellowed keys, as though he had merely been passing time between rehearsals. "Successful expedition?" he inquired without turning. Latch scowled. "The postmistress confirms the parcel. Heavy, registered. Addressed to a Mr. Meredith at the British Library. A respectable destination for smuggled scholarship," said Wimsey, striking a minor chord. "But alas, no way of knowing its contents. Without the warrant of your profession, Miss Ingledew sat stiffly on the edge of a chair. It contained nothing more sinister than a bundle of my uncle's notes. I wanted them examined to prove the book's authenticity. I did not tell you because, well, everyone here thinks the book a fraud, and I wanted to surprise them." "Surprises," murmured Wimsey, "are admirable at birthdays, but hazardous at inquests. Still, your explanation is charmingly plausible. Unfortunately, Mr. Hallowell's death is not—" He rose and came to stand before her, polite but unyielding. "Miss Ingledew, when you dusted the display cases, you found more than lint. Halliwell had discovered something about the book, something that threatened your uncle's reputation, perhaps even your inheritance. Did you confront him?" She stared at the carpet. "I did not harm him." "That," said Wimsey, "is not what I asked." Latch shifted impatiently. "If you've evidence, my lord?" "In time, Inspector." In time, Wimsey turned to the window. "Bunter, read out the note you took from Mrs. Bly this morning." Bunter unfolded his discreet notebook. "Mrs. Bly reports, my lord, that on the night before Mr. Hallowell's death she heard raised voices in the long gallery. One male, one female. She did not distinguish words but described the female voice as Miss Ingledew's, sounding most unlike herself." Miss Ingledew flushed. "We argued, yes. About the catalogue. He claimed one of my uncle's marginal notes was forged. He said he would remove the slip and expose me as a fraud. And the next day," said Wimsey gently, "he died reaching for the book without gloves, as though in a hurry to reclaim something hidden inside." Her hands twisted. "I swear I left him alive. I went to my room to pack the notes for London. When I came back down, he was—" She broke off. Latch gave a small snort of skepticism, but Wimsey raised a hand. "A double life, Inspector. Not Miss Ingledew's, but Mr. Hallowell's. Consider, the man fastidious about gloves, about catalogues, about authenticity, yet secretly buying and selling rare books on his own account. The missing slip might have proved not Miss Ingledew's forgery, but his own theft." Latch blinked. "You're saying Halliwell was crooked?" "I'm saying he lived two lives," said Wimsey. "One as loyal archivist, the other as clandestine dealer. He needed Miss Ingledew's inherited tract to complete a forged set he intended to sell. When she began sending her uncle's notes to London, he panicked. He confronted her, tried to snatch back the evidence, and—" Wimsey let the sentence drift like smoke. "And dropped dead," Latch said, "or was helped on his way. But note this, Halliwell alone signed out the gallery key. Halliwell alone handled the slip box. If someone else interfered, they must have done so with his knowledge or after his collapse. Our timetable still stands, but our understanding of motive shifts. Miss Ingledew may have concealed notes, but not committed murder. The person who gains from Halliwell's death is the one who knew his double life." Miss Ingledew looked up, startled. "Who?" Wimsey smiled faintly. "That, my dear young lady, is Act 3. We are only rehearsing the lines." He turned to Latch. "Inspector, have your men search Halliwell's room. I suspect you will find letters, invoices, perhaps a second set of keys. And ask the village carrier whether any packages left here recently for addresses other than the British Library Latch left muttering orders." Bunter closed his notebook. "You're enjoying yourself, my lord," he murmured. "Immensely," said Wimsey. Nothing like a death in a library to clear the cobwebs. A forged tract, gloves scented with lavender, a missing slip box, and an archivist leading a double life. Delicious. But the best morsel is yet to come. Who placed that smear of ink on the gloves? Not Halliwell. Someone wanted us to think Carraway or Miss Ingledew. Someone very near indeed. He strolled back to the great book, tapped the glass gently, and said almost to himself, "No ghosts, no." The following afternoon, the great drawing-room of Leckenham Court had the air of a parish hall before an amateur performance. Chairs drawn into a semicircle, a faint smell of polish and damp wool, people whispering in corners. Whimsy had arranged the scene with almost theatrical relish. He stood at the hearth, hands behind his back, monocle glinting like a stage light. Bunter occupied a discreet seat by the door, notebook open, the model of a discreet stage manager. Inspector Latch had done as instructed. The staff, Miss Ingledew, and even Carraway had been summoned to give their statements again, this time in front of one another. Whimsy believed that when people repeat a story under new lighting, the shadows shift. Mrs. Bligh, the housekeeper, was called first. She repeated her account of Halliwell's movements. Key at 3, scene at past, hurried, gloveless. "And no one else went into the gallery after that?" Whimsy asked. "Not that I saw, my lord." "You heard raised voices the night before?" "Yes, sir. Mr. Halliwell and Miss Ingledew." "Quarrelling. Quarrels about catalogues are serious things," said Whimsy gravely. "Thank you." Next came George the footman. "I wound the clock Monday," he said. "It always loses when it's wet." "Quite so," said Whimsy. "And did you wind it again on Tuesday?" "No, sir. Then on Tuesday afternoon it was 5 minutes slow, my lord." Whimsy made a note. "Delightful." A slow clock is like a false friend. One never notices it betraying you until you're late for your own funeral. Martha, the parlour maid, confirmed her earlier statement about nearly being knocked over at 4:45. Whimsy asked, "And which direction was Mr. Halliwell coming from?" "The study, sir. Heading back to the gallery, carrying anything." "Just his pen and slips, and he said gloves under his breath like he'd forgot something." When it was Carraway's turn, he looked sulky, but defensive. "I've told you already," he said. "I was in the morning room. When the scream came, I left by the side door. I never touched your precious tract." "You were seen at the post office the week before," Whimsy remarked. "I send parcels constantly." "My business, indeed. But you did not post one on Tuesday." "No." "Yet your shoes bore printer's ink mixed with damp earth," said Whimsy, voice light but eyes sharp. Carraway flushed. "I stepped in something at the inn." "You can't hang a man for dirty soles." "Certainly not," said Whimsy. "But one can trip him with them." Miss Ingledew sat stiffly as her turn came. She repeated that she had argued with Halliwell the previous evening, had gone to her room after dusting the gallery, and had posted her uncle's notes at 4:30. Her voice, though calm, had a tremor running beneath it like a cello string out of tune. Whimsy let a silence fall. Then he said softly, "Miss Ingledew, when you dusted the cases on Tuesday, did you notice anything missing?" She hesitated. "No, only the slip box looked a little untidy." "Untidy?" "Yes, cards askew. Mr. Halliwell never left them so." "And yet you did not mention this before." "I didn't think it important." "Everything unimportant is important," said Whimsy. "Bunter, note the phrase." The inspector shifted. "Is this going somewhere, my lord?" "It is," said Whimsy, "to the twist in our little play." He faced the semicircle like a lecturer before a particularly slow class. "Until now we have accepted that Mr. Halliwell died around 4, but suppose he collapsed nearer 3:40, alone in the gallery, after discovering something inside the Culverhouse tract. Suppose the scream Mrs. Warden heard was not his at all, but someone else's an hour later, upon finding him." A ripple of unease passed through the room. "Who would benefit by that shift?" Whimsy continued. "Why, The person who needed an hour to remove and wrap the slipbox. The person who could plausibly appear later, posting a parcel to London, their hands clean of murder because the archivist had already died. All eyes swung to Miss Ingledew. She opened her mouth, but Whimsy held up a hand. "Before you speak, allow me a demonstration." He crossed to a side table where Bunter had placed a small wooden box. "This, Inspector, is an empty slip box of similar size. From the gallery to the side door, 3 minutes. Down the lane to the post office, 15. Enough time for anyone to carry it unseen before the alarm was raised. We have a window not of opportunity, but of chronology. Someone has been winding our narrative as they pleased, like a clock losing time." Latch frowned. "But if Halliwell was already dead at 3:40, then whoever we thought had no chance had the best chance of all," said Whimsy. "Miss Ingledew's packet may indeed have been only her uncle's notes. But the real slip-box might have gone out earlier, under another name, another address, perhaps posted by a confederate." He turned suddenly to Carroway. "Tell me, Mr. Carroway, do you have an assistant?" "No," the man said. "A clerk? A nephew? Someone who might collect parcels?" "No." Whimsy smiled faintly. "Ah, well, we shall see. Inspector, have your men examined the register at the post office for all parcels sent from this village on Tuesday between 3 and 5. I fancy we shall find a second, heavier packet under a false name." He turned back to Miss Ingledew, voice soft. "You see, my dear young lady, your danger is not guilt, but appearances. Someone has used your movements to cast suspicion. That is the twist. You have been living not your own story, but someone else's." Her eyes widened. "But who?" "That," said Whimsy, "is the last act. We know Halliwell lived a double life. We now know someone exploited your quarrel to hide theirs. We have gloves smeared with ink, a missing slip-box, a forged tract, and a shifted time of death. The net is closing, not on you, but on the one who thinks themselves invisible." He closed his notebook with a snap. "Thank you all. That will be sufficient for today." As the company filed out, whispering, Whimsy remained at the hearth, staring at the pale sunbeam falling across the carpet. Bunter came to his side. "You've rattled them, my lord." "Good," said Whimsy. "Rattled people drop things, sometimes even truths." He slipped his monocle into his pocket and smiled faintly. "We've had our twist in the testimony, Bunter. Next comes the turn of the screw." By dusk the next day, Leckenham Court had been transformed into something between a chapel and a stage. At Whimsy's request, the long gallery had been cleared of visitors, curtains drawn back, and 2 tall standard lamps moved so that their yellow glow fell across the Culver House tract and the parquet floor like footlights on a lectern. The effect was uncanny. The calf-bound book glimmered like a reliquary in a dark nave, while the rest of the gallery sank into shadow. Bunter moved soundlessly about, placing chairs in a half-circle, his white gloves ghostly in the lamplight. "All as you specified, my lord," he murmured. 3 chairs for the principals, the others for the audience." And the clock in the passage adjusted exactly 5 minutes slow. "Excellent," said Whimsy, who was standing at the far window examining the rain-beaded panes with the rapt attention of a painter considering a still life. "Nothing like a touch of stagecraft to tempt a confession. People who think themselves invisible become conspicuous under a spotlight." He turned. "Inspector, have you the parcel?" Latch, gruff and skeptical, held up a brown paper package sealed with the post office's red tape. "Found it this morning at the carrier's shed. Addressed to a Mr. Meredith, British Library, just like Miss Ingledew's. But inside—" He handed it over. Whimsy untied the string with delicate fingers. Out spilled a stack of catalogue slips, each neatly typed, each bearing in Halliwell's precise hand the reference numbers of the Culver House tract. Interleaved were drafts of letters offering a unique early modern devotional collection to a private collector for a sum large enough to make a librarian's eyes water. "Ah," said Wimsey softly, "our missing slip box, reduced to portable form. Halliwell's secret commerce." Miss Ingledew, standing stiffly near the door, gasped. "So he was a forger and a thief," said Wimsey with gentle finality. "Not you, my dear young lady. Mr. Halliwell had planned to sell the forged set abroad and use your uncle's book as the keystone. When you began sending the notes to London, he panicked. He tried to snatch back the evidence, perhaps to destroy it, and in doing so revealed himself to whoever had been watching him." "Then you know who killed him?" Latch demanded. "I have an idea," said Wimsey. "But an idea, like a pudding, must be tested before serving. That is why we have our little theatre tonight at 8 o'clock, the household assembled." Mrs. Warden sat pale and rigid, Miss Ingledew composed but trembling, Carraway glowering with arms folded, the servants whispering. Wimsey entered last, hands in pockets, monocle swinging from its cord like a pendulum. "My friends," he said lightly, "thank you for indulging me in a scene which may seem melodramatic. But murder is a form of drama, and it is only courteous to let the culprit hear the last act before the curtain." He gestured to the great book under its glass. "Here lies the Culver House tract, genuine in binding, false in content. Mr. Halliwell, our late archivist, was its impresario. He discovered that by adding marginalia in an imitation 17th century hand, he could increase its value enormously. He prepared to sell it privately, using Miss Ingledew's inheritance as his unwitting guarantee. When she began sending her uncle's authentic notes to London, he realized his scheme would collapse. He rushed to the gallery, gloves forgotten, to recover or destroy the evidence hidden inside. Someone followed him. Wimsey walked slowly along the row of chairs, speaking almost to himself. "We assumed he died at 4, but he could have collapsed much earlier. In that hidden interval, the slip-box disappeared, and in that same interval, our murderer, or rather our opportunist, acted." He stopped behind Carraway. "Mr. Carraway, you are a book dealer. You had motive to expose Halliwell, but not to kill him. You left by the side door before the alarm, yet your shoes bore printer's ink because you stepped, not in a puddle at the inn, but in the smear left by Halliwell when he handled his forged slips. It made you look guilty. A convenient decoy, he moved to Miss Ingledew. You, my dear, posted a parcel of your uncle's notes to London at 4:30. Perfectly innocent. But to any observer it appeared as though you had removed the slip-box and dispatched it. Another decoy. Then he turned and faced the small figure of Mrs. Warden. But you, madame, had both opportunity and knowledge. You inherited the house from your brother. You knew Halliwell's habits. You controlled the keys. When you found him collapsed at 3:40, you realized at once what he had been doing. You removed the slip-box yourself, not to sell it, but to protect the society's reputation and, incidentally, your own position. You locked the gallery and waited. When the scream went up later, you let Inspector Latch assume he had died only moments before. A neat piece of stage management, a collective intake of breath. Mrs. Warden's lips tightened. "This is monstrous," she said softly. "Not monstrous," said Wimsey. "Merely human. You feared scandal. Perhaps you even thought Halliwell beyond help. But by moving the evidence and letting suspicion fall on others, you turned an archivist's collapse into a mystery. A mystery, alas, I cannot allow to stand." He nodded to Bunter. The valet stepped forward with another small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "This," said Wimsey, "was recovered from the false back of your writing desk, madam." The remainder of the slips, tied with your lavender ribbon, Mrs. Warden's hands trembled. "I did not kill him," she whispered. "He was already dead. I only wanted to spare the society." "I believe you," said Whimsy gently. "But in-law concealment after death is still a serious matter. You must explain yourself to the authorities." She bowed her head. "I will." The room was silent except for the ticking of the slow clock in the passage. Whimsy glanced at it and smiled faintly. "We have set our clocks to rights at last," he said. Mr. Hallowell's double life, Miss Ingledew's apparent guilt, Mr. Carraway's ink-stained shoes, Mrs. Warden's quiet removal of the slip-box, all mere hands moving the minute hand forward or back. Now the hour strikes. Inspector Latch cleared his throat, less gruff than usual. "I'll take her statement," he said. "If you're right, my lord, it's concealment, not murder." Whimsy slipped his monocle into his pocket. "And if I'm wrong, Inspector, I shall eat the Culver House tract without gloves." A faint, incredulous laugh ran round the room. Even Miss Ingledew managed a tremulous smile. Carraway muttered something about never trusting. Librarian's Whimsy, however, only looked at the book under its glass. "A good forgery," he murmured. But the true crime was not the forgery. It was the timetable. People think time is a straight corridor. In fact, it is a maze, and murder hides best in its dead ends. He turned back to the assembled faces. "Thank you for your performances. The play is not quite over. One more scene, a few more lines, and then our curtain." Morning sunlight, sharp and clean after a night of steady rain, poured through the long gallery's tall windows and made the calf-bound tract glow like polished bronze. The storm of accusations from the previous evening had left Leckenham Court in a hush. Servants moved softly, as if a fragile object might shatter at the least sound. In the study, Lord Peter Whimsy sat at a small writing table, penning a note to Harriet in his precise hand, while Bunter arranged a tray with coffee and a dish of buttered eggs. "I trust," said Whimsy without looking up, "that Inspector Latch has our reluctant heroine under gentle surveillance?" "Indeed, my lord," Bunter replied. "Mrs. Warden remains in her room. The inspector has taken her preliminary statement. He seems disposed to believe her version, and yet," said Whimsy, capping his pen, "the story is too neat. Neatness in crime, like over-seasoning in soup, makes one suspicious." He rose, hands in pockets, and began pacing. "Consider, Mrs. Warden finds Halliwell collapsed at 3:40. She removes the slip-box to spare the society. She lets the alarm be raised later. Very touching, but one detail does not fit." "The gloves, my lord?" Bunter asked softly. "Precisely." Halliwell died, clutching a new pair he had not worn. Gloves scented with lavender and printer's ink. Not his usual make. Why? Because someone handed them to him at the last moment, or placed them in his hands after death. Bunter inclined his head. "To implicate another. Or to conceal their own prints," said Whimsy. "We assumed Mrs. Warden only removed the slip-box. But what if Halliwell was not dead when she found him? What if someone else came upon him first?" He moved to the window, looking out across the steaming lawns where constables tramped. "We have yet to unmask our true actor. The forger we know, the killer we do not. A double life invites double motives. Who else in this house could profit?" Before Bunter could answer, there was a knock. Inspector Latch entered, his manner brisk. "We've searched Halliwell's room as you asked. Found letters from a London dealer arranging the sale of the forged set. In this, he held out a small bottle labeled in Halliwell's hand, 'Restorative Solution for Calf Bindings.'" Whimsy uncorked it, sniffed, and raised an eyebrow. "Arsenic-based, excellent for killing mildew, and in sufficient quantity." Archivist's Latch frowned. "You think he was poisoned?" "I think," said Whimsy, "that someone put a few drops of this into his habitual tea, or on the gloves, or on the paper he handled. A subtle thing. Slow enough to make him collapse, but not die at once. Enough time for the culprit to remove the slip-box and rearrange the scene." "And Mrs. Warden?" Latch asked. She may have removed evidence, but she is no poisoner. She's a creature of propriety, not cunning chemistry." Whimsy smiled faintly. "No, Inspector. Our murderer is cleverer and hungrier." He rang for Miss Ingledew. When she arrived, she looked pale but defiant. "You've more questions?" she asked. "A few," said Whimsy lightly. "Forgive the impertinence, but did Mr. Halliwell ever visit you in London?" "No." "Did he ever speak of a Mr. Meredith?" She hesitated. "Only once." "He said Meredith was a pseudonym, his private collector." "Indeed," murmured Whimsy. "Then you did not invent the address on your parcel?" "Of course not. I used it because he told me all genuine material should go there. I thought it was a curator at the British Library." Whimsy exchanged a glance with Bunter. "Then Halliwell's confederate is not in London at all," he said softly. "He invented Meredith, but someone here knew of it and used it to send away the slips." Someone who understood the book trade and the smell of printer's ink. Miss Ingledew looked puzzled. "But that would be—" "Mr. Carroway," said Whimsy gently. A constable ushered the dealer into the study. He looked rumpled, but still defiant. "What now?" "Merely a final clarification," said Whimsy. "You told us you left by the side door at 4, yet you were seen at the carrier's shed at 3:50 with a parcel. You said it was books for a client. In fact, it was the slip box. You and Halliwell had planned the sale together, but when he wavered, you decided to remove the evidence and arrange his collapse to look like a seizure. The gloves with printer's ink were your touch, to suggest Miss Ingledew. Neat. Almost too neat. Carroway's face darkened. That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Whimsy lifted the small bottle of restorative solution. "Your fingerprints are on this. And the carrier remembers you asking whether a delicate liquid could travel safely by post. A restorative for bindings, yes, but also an arsenic preparation. You slipped it onto Halliwell's gloves, knowing he would put them on before touching the book. He collapsed. You took the slips. Mrs. Warden later found him and removed what she thought was the only incriminating evidence. The perfect alibi." Carroway licked his lips. "You can't prove any of that." "Bunter," said Whimsy. "The gloves." Bunter produced the pair sealed in a bag. "Tested, my lord." The fingertips saturated with the solution, Latch stepped forward grimly. "That's enough for me." Carroway made a sudden movement as though to lunge for the door, but 2 constables blocked him. He sagged, muttering, "He was going to cheat me." "Take the whole sum. He deserved—" Whimsy raised a hand. "Please, spare us the Jacobean confession. You killed for money, not for poetry. It will look better on the charge sheet." Latch snapped the cuffs on. "Joseph Carroway, I'm arresting you for the murder of Mr. Halliwell." As they led him out, Miss Ingledew let out a long, shuddering breath. "So it wasn't me," she whispered. "No," said Whimsy kindly. "You were a convenient shadow for someone else's guilt. People who live among books forget that margins may hide traps as well as notes." He walked to the window and watched the constables escort Carroway across the wet gravel. "We have unmasked our actor at last, Bunter." Curtain down Bunter said softly, "Very neat, my lord." "Almost too neat," said Whimsy, "but the neatness this time is mine." He turned back to the great book under its glass. Poor Culverhouse. He preached of sin and secrecy. Halliwell forged his words. Carroway poisoned with them. Mrs. Warden concealed them. A whole morality play enacted in calfskin. One almost hears the chorus. Miss Ingledew managed a wan smile. "What happens now?" "Now," said Whimsy, slipping his monocle into his pocket, "you reclaim your inheritance, write to the British Library to explain, and perhaps take a holiday. Libraries can be dangerous for the unwary." She rose. "I don't know how to thank you." "A simple note will suffice," said Whimsy. "Address it to Lord Peter Whimsy, C/O Scotland Yard. Include a quotation from Shakespeare if you like. Misquoted if possible. I have a weakness for correcting them." He watched her go, then picked up his untouched coffee. "Well, Bunter, we've reached the unmasking. Only the epilogue remains. Shall I pack, my lord?" "After luncheon," said Wimsey. "We must give the press time to print their headlines. Book dealer held in country house murder. It will look very well on the society page." He smiled faintly. "And perhaps Harriet will forgive me for missing her lecture. She prefers her murders without footnotes, but one must indulge one's hobbies." The following morning dawned with a low, pewter light over Barrow in Fern. A soft mist clung to the hedgerows and to the red brick chimneys of Leckenham Court, as though the house itself exhaled relief after a long fever. Inside, however, the atmosphere was not yet cured. In the small panelled parlour adjoining the library, Joseph Carroway sat at a table, wrists cuffed, staring into a mug of cooling tea while Inspector Latch drafted his charge sheet in a spidery hand. Two constables stood by the door. Lord Peter Wimsey had arranged himself in an armchair opposite, knees crossed, hat on the floor beside him. He looked less like a detective than a courteous guest lingering after breakfast, yet the tilt of his head and the faint narrowing of his eyes suggested a falcon waiting for its prey to flinch. "You slept, I trust?" he asked Carroway conversationally. The dealer gave a short, bitter laugh. "About as well as a man can sleep on a hard mattress with a policeman breathing in the corridor." "Ah, yes. The romance of crime ends at bedtime." Wimsey tapped his monocle against his palm. "Inspector Latch will soon have you conveyed to town. But before you go, I thought we might tidy a few small details. They trouble me like misaligned spines on a shelf." Carroway shifted, glancing at the constables. "I've said all I'm going to say." "That," said Wimsey mildly, "is rarely true. People always think their confession is complete, but it's usually a draft lacking footnotes." He leaned forward. "Why arsenic, Mr. Carroway?" "Why the gloves?" Halliwell drank tea daily. "You could have slipped it into his cup." Carroway's fingers tightened round the mug. "I didn't plan murder. I only wanted to frighten him. A few drops of the binding solution on his gloves. He'd feel faint, have to lie down. I meant to retrieve the slips, confront him later, but he collapsed too soon." "Yes," the dealer's voice cracked. He started gasping. "I panicked. I took the slip box and ran. By the time I got back, he was dead." Wimsey regarded him with grave interest. "So you did not intend to kill?" "I swear it. He was cheating me. I'd introduced him to the collector. Meredith is real enough. But he meant to cut me out. I thought a scare might—" He broke off. "Might restore your bargaining position," supplied Wimsey. "You see, Inspector, our culprit falters." He believed himself a villain in a melodrama, but discovered too late he was playing tragedy. Latch finished writing and blew on the ink. "It's still manslaughter at best, murder at worst." Carroway put his head in his hands. "I never wanted this." Wimsey's tone was almost gentle. "Few do. Murder is like a misprint, rarely deliberate, often devastating. But you made a fatal footnote in someone else's book. That cannot be erased." Bunter appeared silently in the doorway with a tray. "Coffee, my lord." "Bless you, Bunter." Wimsey accepted a cup and sipped. "Do you know, Carroway, what intrigues me most? Not your motive, not your method, but your stagecraft. The gloves scented with lavender, very subtle, meant to suggest Miss Ingledew. Yet you forgot that Halliwell in a panic might never put them on. You left your mark instead of hers." Carroway gave a humorless laugh. "I thought I was clever." "You were," said Wimsey. "Clever enough to forge a legend, but not wise enough to control a timeline. Time, Mr. Carroway, is the enemy of improvisation." The clock on the mantel chimed 9, each note echoing in the small room like the tolling of a slow bell. Carroway flinched at the sound. Wimsey rose, straightening his cuffs. "Well, Inspector, the stage is yours." Latch nodded to his men. "Take him down to the car." "Where for the station?" As the constables led Carraway away, he turned back once, face ashen. "Tell Miss Ingledew—" "I'm sorry," he muttered. Whimsy inclined his head gravely. "I shall. But she may not thank you for the apology." When they were gone, Bunter closed the door and looked at his master. "A sordid little business after all, my lord." "All the best ones are," said Whimsy. "It's the sordidness that makes the deduction worthwhile. Without human folly, there would be no art in solving it." He walked into the long gallery. The great book lay under its glass once more, but now it seemed dull, its gilt titles tarnished by confession. Miss Ingledew stood at the window, pale but upright, her hands clasped. "It's over?" she asked. "For you, yes," said Whimsy gently. "For Carraway, the law begins." She looked at the book. "I almost wish it had burned in the Colonel's day." "It's caused nothing but harm, not the book," said Whimsy. "People. A book is only a stage. We supply the actors." He glanced at the clock in the passage. 5 minutes fast now." The inspector has wound it correctly at last. Miss Ingledew gave a faint smile. "What happens next?" "Next," said Whimsy, "I write a tidy report. Inspector Latch files his charges. And you, my dear, rebuild your catalogue. If I may offer advice, never again entrust gloves to a man who sells books for a living." She gave a short, surprised laugh. "Thank you, Lord Peter." "You've been very kind." "Not at all. Kindness is only another form of curiosity." He turned to Bunter. "Pack our things. We shall catch the midday train." As he strolled down the gallery, a shaft of sunlight fell across the calfskin binding, making it gleam once more. Whimsy paused, monocle in place, and murmured to himself, "Exit the villain." The play moves toward its epilogue. The trial of Joseph Carraway would, of course, come in its due season and be reported in the Cheltenham Chronicle with the sort of sedate outrage reserved for forgeries, arsenic, and other breaches of taste. By the time the first headlines appeared, Lord Peter Whimsy and Bunter were already on the London train, their luggage neatly stacked, their minds turned to lighter things. But the case of the book that waited on the shelf too long had left a lingering aroma at Leckenham Court. Lavender, printer's ink, and a faint whiff of shame. It was 3 days after Carraway's arrest when Whimsy made his farewell call. The mist had burned away to reveal a fragile spring day. Crocuses pushed through the damp grass by the terrace. Miss Ingledew received him in the small library, now stripped of its display cases. The Culver House tract, sealed and labelled, lay on a side table ready for a journey to the British Library where, as Miss Ingledew said, it can do no more mischief. "You're quite certain of that?" Whimsy asked, turning the great book over with gloved fingers. "Some objects enjoy mischief. But perhaps we've deprived this one of its actors." She smiled faintly. "The Society has voted to donate it. I've resigned as curator. I'm going to take a post at a college library in London. A fresh start." "Excellent," said Whimsy. "London libraries have their perils, but at least the villains there prefer typewriters to arsenic." She looked at him with a kind of grave gratitude. "I never thanked you properly, not only for clearing me, but for not humiliating Mrs. Warden more than necessary." "Mrs. Warden," said Whimsy, "committed concealment, not murder. She will receive a fine and a footnote, not a sentence. A fitting end for a woman who has spent her life indexing other people's secrets." Miss Ingledew hesitated. "Do you believe Carraway truly meant only to frighten Mr. Halliwell?" "Intent," said Whimsy, "is a slippery eel. It wriggles away at the first tug of consequence, but the jury may accept his story. It will not bring Halliwell back, but it may keep Carraway from the gallows." He replaced the book on the table. A Jacobean morale, greed, secrecy, and a little chemical knowledge make for tragedy. And yet, he added with a glint of humor, One must admire the elegance of his catalogue slips." She laughed, despite herself. "You sound almost sorry for him." "I'm always sorry for stupidity in the presence of cleverness," said Wimsey. "It gives cleverness a bad name." Bunter appeared at the door with his usual silent efficiency. "The car is ready, my lord." Wimsey put on his hat. "Well, Miss Ingledew, we take our leave. Try not to dust any more cases without gloves, and if you must post parcels, make them light ones." She rose and offered her hand. "Goodbye, Lord Peter." "And thank you," he bowed over her fingers. "Goodbye, my dear." If you ever feel tempted to collect 17th century devotional tracts again, remember this case and invest in something safer, like crocodiles. They left the library and walked down the echoing corridor. The slow clock in the passage, newly wound, ticked with steady propriety. Wimsey paused to listen. "Bunter," he said softly, "our clocks are right at last." It gives me a faint sense of anticlimax. "Not anticlimax, my lord," Bunter replied. "Resolution." Outside, the car waited in the gravel drive. The mist had lifted entirely and sunlight gleamed on the wet stone of the terrace. Mrs. Warden stood there, small and grey, like a figure carved from the very masonry. She inclined her head as Wimsey passed. "I shall tell the magistrate everything," she said quietly. "Perhaps they'll understand." "I hope they will," Wimsey said gently. "Truth is often duller than suspicion, but kinder." She gave a wan smile. "Goodbye, Lord Peter." He tipped his hat. "Goodbye, Mrs. Warden. Next time you label a book, do not handle without gloves. Be sure it applies to the staff as well." Bunter opened the car door. As they drove away down the lane, Wimsey looked back once at the red brick facade of Leckenham Court, its windows glinting like blank eyes. "Another country house, another morality play," he murmured. "What was it Culverhouse wrote? The wages of sin is secrecy. One might add, secrecy pays a poor wage." Bunter said, "Shall I send a note to Lady Harriet, my lord?" "Yes, Bunter. Tell her the lecture on lost ballads must wait. I've been busy with a different kind of poetry, the sort written in lavender ink and calfskin." He leaned back against the seat, eyes half closed as the car rolled past hedgerows and dripping trees. "It's odd, Bunter. Murder never looks so small as when one's solved it. All that effort, all that cunning, and at the center, a frightened man clutching gloves he never put on." Bunter's hands were steady on the wheel. A pity about Mr. Halliwell. Yes, he forged words but not courage. Poor devil Wimsey opened his eyes and watched a rook rise from a field. Still, the case had its charms. A slow clock, a missing slip, a book that waited on the shelf too long. One might almost make a sermon of it. They reached the station with a few minutes to spare. As the porter loaded their luggage, a boy approached with the morning papers. Wimsey bought one and glanced at the headline, "Book dealer held in rare tract death." He smiled faintly and folded it into his coat pocket. On the platform, Harriet's letter lay waiting in his mind like a bookmark. He thought of her at Oxford, lecturing on Jacobean verse, while he untangled a Jacobean crime. The train drew in with a hiss of steam. Wimsey stepped aboard, found his seat, and settled with an air of mild satisfaction. "Bunter," he said as the countryside began to slide past the window, "do you know the trouble with books?" "My lord?" "They never tell you what page you'll be on when the murder occurs. One must read the whole thing to find out. Fortunately, we've reached the end." He took off his hat, leaned back, and closed his eyes as the train gathered speed, carrying him away from Leckenham Court and its lavender-scented gloves. Outside, the fields gleamed with a watery sun, and the hedges ran like dark lines of print across a page. Inside, Lord Peter Wimsey smiled his small, ironic smile, a man who had once again put the footnotes of a crime back into their proper order.